On June 28, 2008, 17-year-old Asia LeSean Ferguson IV arrived at Six Flags Over Georgia with a church group from Okie Spring Baptist Church in Springfield, South Carolina. The group had traveled together for a summer outing, looking forward to a day of thrilling rides, games, and fellowship at one of the most popular amusement parks in the region. Asia had a passion for sports and adventure, and like many others in his group, he was excited to experience the park's biggest attractions. Six Flags Over Georgia featured some of the most intense roller coasters in the state, including Goliath, Superman Ultimate Fight, and Batman: The Ride. At some point during the afternoon, Asia and another teenager separated from the main group, making their way toward Batman: The Ride. This inverted roller coaster had been a major attraction at the park since its opening in 1997. Designed to give riders the sensation of flying through Gotham City, the ride featured sharp turns, loops, and high speeds, with riders' legs dangling freely beneath the track. Batman: The Ride reached speeds of up to 50 miles per hour, covering 2,693 feet of track. It was known for its intense G-forces, with sections of the ride coming dangerously close to the ground. For safety reasons, a restricted zone was built beneath the ride, ensuring that no one could accidentally wander into its path. The area was surrounded by two separate fences, each standing 6 feet tall, with clear warning signs stating "Do not enter" and "Authorized personnel only." These barriers were in place to prevent guests from entering an area where trains zoom past at extreme speeds. Despite these safety measures, Asia and his companion somehow entered the restricted area. To do so, they had to scale both fences, ignoring the warning signs posted on them. Some early reports suggested that Asia might have been retrieving a lost hat, as similar incidents had happened at other amusement parks. However, authorities later ruled out the hat retrieval theory, stating there was no evidence he had lost anything. Once inside, Asia and the other teenager were directly beneath the track of the coaster, in an area where ride operators and park employees could not see them. Batman: The Ride was operational at the time, running as usual. The coaster was designed to stay low to the ground in certain sections, with support beams and steel track structures surrounding the area. Asia had no warning as the train approached at full speed. He was likely unaware of the exact path the coaster took. At approximately 2 p.m., as the train came barreling through one of its loops at 50 miles per hour, Asia was struck with full force. The impact was catastrophic. The coaster's ride felt a sudden, violent jolt, but at high speeds, many were unaware of what had happened. Nearby witnesses saw the horrific accident unfold. Among them was an off-duty police officer from Georgia who immediately alerted the park security and called for help. Park security and emergency medical personnel rushed to the scene, but there was nothing that they could do. Asia had been killed instantly on impact. His body was recovered from the restricted area, and the ride was immediately shut down as authorities began an investigation. Asia's family, who were present at the park that day, were notified of his death. They were devastated, struggling to comprehend how their joyful summer trip had ended in an unimaginable tragedy. His father, Asia LeSean Ferguson III, later described his son as a bright, outgoing young man who was always smiling and full of energy. Following the incident, the park launched a formal investigation to determine how and why Asia had been able to access the restricted area. Authorities confirmed that all safety measures were in place. The fences were secure, the warning signs were clearly visible, and there was no evidence of park negligence. The investigation concluded that Asia had entered the restricted area voluntarily, though his exact reasoning remains unknown. Six Flags Over Georgia temporarily closed Batman: The Ride after the incident. The Georgia Department of Labor, responsible for overseeing amusement park safety, conducted a full inspection before allowing the ride to reopen. Their findings confirmed that the ride had been operating as designed and that the accident resulted from unauthorized entry into a restricted zone, not a mechanical failure. On the night of August 4th, 2013, in Campbellton, New Brunswick, Canada, two young brothers, Noah and Connor Barth, were having a sleepover at their best friend's home. Noah was 6 years old and Connor was 4. The boys had spent the entire day playing outside, enjoying what should have been an ordinary summer evening. They had been at the home of Jean-Claude Sauvage, the father of their friend, who lived in an apartment above his exotic pet store, Reptile Ocean. The boys loved animals. They had visited this home many times before and were no strangers to the exotic creatures inside the store below. They even helped feed a small group of farm animals that Sauvage kept in a pen behind the building. The day had been long, filled with excitement, and by the time night fell, the two brothers were exhausted. A mattress had been placed on the living room floor for them, and they quickly fell asleep. But while they slept, something was moving above them, something they could not see, something that should have never been loose. Sauvage had lived in this apartment for years. Among the many reptiles he kept in his store, he had a single, particularly large and dangerous snake inside his home. An African rock python measuring 14 feet or 4.3 meters and weighing nearly 100 pounds or 45 kilograms. The python had been in his care for over a decade. African rock pythons are among the largest snakes in the world. They are powerful constrictors with a reputation for aggression. Unlike common pet constrictors like ball pythons or boa constrictors, African rock pythons are unpredictable and extremely strong. The snake was kept in a large glass enclosure in Sauvage's apartment, separate from the reptiles in the store. Above the enclosure was a ventilation duct that connected to the apartment's ceiling. At some point before the kids went to sleep, a metal vent cover had been removed for maintenance but was never properly secured again. The cover had fallen onto the floor multiple times, yet Sauvage had assumed the snake was too large to escape through the opening. But sometime during the night, the python did something unexpected. Driven by curiosity or perhaps by the lingering scent of the animals the boys had fed earlier that day, it forced its way into the open ventilation duct. Once inside, it slithered through the ceiling, directly above the room where Noah and Connor lay sleeping. As it moved, the snake's massive body caused the ceiling tiles to weaken under its weight. For minutes, possibly even hours, it moved unseen, gliding above the sleeping boys in near silence. Then, without warning, a section of the ceiling collapsed. The python plummeted from the darkness above, landing directly into the living room. The sudden impact likely jolted the boys awake, but before they could react, the snake instinctively coiled around them. African rock pythons kill by constriction, wrapping their bodies tightly around their prey and tightening their grip with every exhale. Each time the victim breathes out, the snake's coils grow tighter, preventing them from drawing in another breath. Struggling only makes the constriction worse. There were no screams. There were no signs of a struggle beyond the horrifying evidence that would be found the next morning. The snake's powerful muscles compressed, squeezing the life from their small bodies within minutes. Unlike some constrictors, which may release their grip once their prey is unconscious, African rock pythons continue constricting until all movement has stopped. By the time Sauvage entered the living room the next morning, the boys were unresponsive. The massive snake was still in the room, stretched out on or near the bodies of Noah and Connor. The horrifying realization hit immediately. Authorities were called and paramedics quickly arrived, but there was nothing they could do. The boys had already succumbed to asphyxiation. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police launched an immediate investigation. Reptile Ocean was shut down, and all the animals inside were seized. The python was captured and later euthanized. As news of the tragedy spread, it sparked shock and outrage. How had a dangerous 100-pound predator been allowed to live in a home where children were present? Why hadn't the open ventilation duct been secured long before the incident? Sauvage was later charged with criminal negligence causing death. The prosecutors argued that he had failed to properly secure the snake's enclosure, despite knowing about the ventilation duct being open. During the trial, it was revealed that the vent cover had been on the floor multiple times, yet Sauvage never fixed it. The defense, however, claimed that he had no reason to believe the python would escape in such a way. The snake had been in his care for years and never had attempted to leave its enclosure before. The jury deliberated, and in November 2016, he was found not guilty. The court ruled that while the event was tragic, there was not enough evidence to prove criminal negligence beyond a reasonable doubt. The ultimate truth is simple yet devastating. A single mistake, the vent being left unsecure, costed 2 innocent children their lives. Eliezer Torres Gomez arrived for his shift at the Cintas Industrial Laundry Facility in Tulsa, Oklahoma in the morning. The air inside the plant was thick, with steam and the smell of detergent, the rhythmic sounds of conveyor belts, and industrial dryers filling the massive space. At some point during his shift, Torres noticed a jam on one of the conveyor belts, leading to a dryer. Conveyor jams weren't uncommon, sometimes clothes bunched together, causing blockages that disrupted the flow of operations. Workers were expected to clear these jams quickly to prevent any delays. According to company policy, anytime maintenance was performed on a conveyor, the machine was supposed to be shut down first. This was a critical safety measure designed to prevent accidents. But for reasons unknown, Torres climbed onto the moving conveyor belt without stopping the machine. Perhaps he thought it would be a simple fix. Maybe he was under pressure to keep the line moving, but within seconds, his uniform was caught in the machinery. The belt pulled him forward with relentless force, dragging him toward the gaping mouth of the industrial dryer ahead. He fought to pull himself free, struggling against the crushing grip of the machine, but the conveyor did not stop. No one saw what was happening in time to intervene. The belt fed him directly into the dryer's chamber, and the heavy door slammed shut behind him, locking automatically. The cycle began immediately. The dryer was designed to tumble its contents for 20 minutes, ensuring that every piece of fabric inside was evenly heated and dried. The machine's drum rotated constantly, slamming its contents against its steel walls as the temperature began to rise. The air inside quickly became unbearably hot, climbing past 200 degrees Fahrenheit in minutes. Trapped in the pitch-black interior, Torres was thrown against the scalding metal, his body flipping and rolling with each rotation. His skin began to burn on contact with the heated surface, blisters forming almost instantly before being torn away as he was thrown into another part of the drum. The moisture from the wet uniforms surrounding him turned into searing steam, filling the small chamber with boiling humidity. The constant motion fractured his ribs, dislocated his joints, and shattered the smaller bones in his hands and fingers as he instinctively tried to brace himself against the rotating walls. His clothing soaked at first, quickly dried, and then ignited in places where it made direct contact with the hottest surfaces, fusing to his skin. After 10 minutes, his body was in shock. Dehydration set in as he lost his fluids rapidly through his burns. His nervous system, overwhelmed by the sheer volume of pain, began to shut down. As he struggled to breathe, his throat swollen nearly shut from the exposure to the scorching air. What makes this even more worse, he was still conscious for most of this time, his body fighting, desperate for survival, but there was no escape. Every attempt to move only resulted in more searing pain, more broken bones, and more of his skin being stripped away with each collision. At the 15-minute mark, his body had been brutalized beyond recognition. His skin, once blistered, was now charred in some places and completely torn away in others, revealing cooked muscles underneath. His lungs were failing, starved of oxygen, his body shutting down organ by organ. His nerve endings had been destroyed in the most exposed areas, meaning that by the final minutes, he may have not been able to feel the worst of what was happening to him. Although his body was a ruined mass of burned, broken tissue, and his mind likely drifted into unconsciousness as his pulse slowed. When the dryer finally stopped and the door unlatched automatically, his body was barely recognizable as a human. A worker arrived to unload the freshly dried uniforms, opening the machine as he had done countless times before. The sight inside made him freeze. There, among the clothing, what was remained of Torres Gomez. His body was twisted and contorted from the constant tumbling, his skin blackened and peeling, fused in places with the melted fabric of his uniform. His face was unrecognizable, his hands locked in a final futile attempt to shield himself. The worker who discovered him staggered back, unable to process what he was looking at. Chaos erupted in the facility. Some workers screamed, others stood in silent horror, unable to look away. Managers scrambled to contain the situation, but there was nothing they could do. The authorities arrived quickly, and soon OSHA launched an investigation into what had gone wrong. Their findings were damning. Cintas had a long history of safety violations across multiple locations. Lockout-tagout procedures, which were supposed to ensure the machinery was turned off before maintenance, were not being followed properly. Workers had never been given adequate training to prevent such an incident, and the facility lacked the necessary safeguards that could have stopped the machine in time. Cintas was fined $2.7 million, one of the largest penalties ever issued in an industrial accident case. The company initially tried to shift blame onto Torres Gomez, claiming he had failed to follow safety protocols, but the truth was undeniable. This was not a freak accident. It was the direct result of negligence. His widow sued the company, reaching a settlement for an undisclosed amount, but my guess, it was a lot. But no amount of money could undo what had happened. The changes that followed were too late. For Torres Gomez, new safety measures were implemented, emergency shutoff switches were installed, and workers were given more training. But none of that erased the fact that he had been burned alive inside a machine that should have never been running when he climbed onto that conveyor.